Hello everyone, it is Joe here from OmniPoke, the channel that brings you guys everything Pokemon. If you're looking for PTCG live codes, make sure you check out the Potown store. You can get a 5% discount on your orders using that code OmniPoke. For today's video, we are going to be going over the top 8 decks of the Peoria Regional Championships, as well as the Day 1 and 2 meta breakdown. We actually jump over to the West Coast for the Sacramento Regional Championships this weekend, so there will be an obvious knee-jerk. This was the first tournament where players could use the 151 cards, and it's going to continue into that event. And then we also have the Lille Regional Championships, which I'm going to be playing in, so going to be important to keep my eye out for that one and get testing myself with some of these adapted deck lists, because we did have some pretty interesting results overall. We do have 7 of the 8 deck lists. Fortunately, Jesse Parker, who piloted Miraidon, the list we don't have, would have likely been very similar to JW. They are a testing team together, and I imagine we will eventually get to see the deck list as well. Jesse has already done very well with Miraidon in the past, so probably going to have some good pedigree behind that 60 anyway. However, we're going to start off with Raymond Long, who was able to win with Kyogre, so looks like another huge tournament being taken down. This is a 1,700 player tournament, and it's a different adaptation of Kyogre. Typically, we've seen it more similar to the just regular turbo builds, where you still see the Dragonite, you still see the Raikou V in here, whereas this list is playing 2 Forest Seal Stones, but only has that Pidgeot V as the only target in the deck list, which is trying to Vanishing Wings itself back off the board, meaning that this deck is going to be Puritan single prize, and actually uses the metal energy in the deck to help with Zamazenta here. Zamazenta does 100 base damage, but does 120 more if you suffered a knockout on your previous turn. So 220 for a single prize Pokemon is a really big burst of damage. And I think the incentive around this deck list is just to remain as one pricey as possible to extend the game and make yourself have as many turns as possible to work in the Aqua Storm, which is really powerful. I also feel like Zamazenta, really decent card right now for being a higher damage output one prize mon in the list, and this could be a knee-jerk reaction to Colorless Lugia somewhat as well, where Raymond may have been expecting more single prize versus single prize matchups as the Lugia tries to cosplay as that a little bit. Just with an army of Snorlax. So having a damage threshold that's high enough to get through Snorlax and also get through opposing, basic V Pokemon just with a one prize uptrade mon is also very, very handy. So really solid list. I remember when Zamazenta first came out in Crown Zenith, I really was enjoying this Kyogre approach, but it seemed to just get pushed out by the sort of general consensus that the turbo build gave you better matchups. But it seems like Raymond's come with a really good idea, bringing this one sort of back, really. And it felt like a really good time to be playing this sort of approach. There's no real surprises with the trainer cards, just fairly light on the recovery with the triple rod, the double recycler, knowing that you're not going to Aqua Storm every single game, but in the matchups, where there are multiple multi-prize Pokemon around on the board, you will try and use that Kyogre, definitely against the Mew players, definitely against, like Miraidons, this can be huge, Lugia players, this can be huge, so there are a number of matchups where the Storm comes in clutch, and yeah, really powerful list. Going to be interesting to see that tug of war between this list and a more similar to Turbo approach, which was actually what got in second here, the much more Turbo Lost Box that we've come to know. Not having enough energy in the deck list to support a Kyogre package, just going very high on the Forest Seal Stones. The Vacuums is incorporating Clara as well as Boss's Orders. Interestingly, having no hand disruption whatsoever. Typically, we have seen like one Roxanne in the list to try and help out with mirror match situations, but that's not being incorporated in this 60 at all. Just going for raw speed, really. Seeing the Echoing Horn in here as well, something you don't always see in turbo builds, but was incorporated in this one to a really solid finish. I found it quite interesting to see a deck list that basically had no tech card for Snorlax or Colorless Lugia altogether, because I feel like that was really the murmurings going into Peoria, that Colorless Lugia was going to take away a lot of meta share and representation from, Tina and Lost Zone Box in general, but this list seems to have been unscathed and not too worried about Colorless Lugia overall, which was very popular day 1, but really fell off day 2. We'll talk about it later on in the video. So maybe with Colorless not doing so well, there may be a shift back from Colorless to Single Strike Lugias going into Sacramento, or maybe just a fall off of Lugia altogether with so much from Rhydon once again doing well. These are all reasons why there could be shifts backwards in the meta in many ways, where people just don't have the confidence in Colorless Lugia, because it really underperformed the expectation from online tournament results, at the very least from Yokohama tournament results as well, where it got second place in Japan. It seemed to really, really do quite poorly, an awful conversion rate. So maybe Turbo Lost Box is still just fine and doesn't have to worry about colorless going ahead. Rowan was also piloting a really interesting 60, a grabber-based build of Mew VMAX, but also playing the Fang Snipe Luxray V, which can take a trainer out of your opponent's hand. I'm pretty sure Rowan went over this on their Twitter, saying it was very helpful against the Charizard matchup in particular, where you're just trying to remove things like Arven from the opponent's hand and hope that with like Path plus Fang Snipe, the opponent doesn't really get into the game too much, and then you can pick apart their board. And I think the grabber also helps in that endeavor. And certainly in late game scenarios as well, you can go for Iono plus Grabber plus Fang Snipe plays, and it can buy you time against all sorts of matchups, actually. So, really interesting combination, not something that I was expecting too much, and it's very bold to have played a DTE build of Mew, just saying that hopefully I don't run into many Spiritombs throughout the day, because people are hoping that Charizard does the work against the Mew matchup. But Rowan was one step ahead by having a tech card for the Charizard players. So this is going to be one that I just have to test, really, because I haven't really played with the Luxray package before, and it seems to flip a matchup from quite awkward into quite reasonable, and as long as you do that, then you're still having this consistent shell of Mew behind you. So yeah, definitely one that we have to respect going forward. Maybe it means that we start seeing Spiritomb come back into some deck lists, which is going to be another small tug of war that Mew has to deal with. But Run made a really, really strong call for this tournament, and put the testing in with, essentially, Mew just had to figure out one matchup, right? If it figures out the Charizard matchup, and it seems like Luxray seems to do that with Grabber, if you figure that out, you know your matchup spread previously was really strong with Mew. So Rum put the time in and came up with a really creative deck list to get a very solid result once again at Regionals. We do have JW's deck list. The two question marks here, I'm pretty certain they're beach courts, because I think I watched some of the gameplay, and beach courts are those final two spaces. So playing 5 stadiums total is quite high, actually, for Miraidon, but it looks like they wanted to have that balance of having Path Disruption for the Stage 2 matchups, like Guardian Charizard, but also have beach courts so you can still have those power spike attacks going second. And JW actually chose to go second in a couple of the matchups. Didn't work out for them in the Lost Zone matchup, but I do like the mentality of forcing them to go first, make them have the good hand without the help of Colrus, and just force them to have more. So a nice mentality thing and a good thing to pick up on if you are thinking of playing Miraidon yourself in the next couple of weeks. That the Lost Zone matchup might be the only one, I think, where you choose to go second. Possibly also the Mirror as well. I think that's a bit shaky because of how easy it is for the Mirror to throw a single prize Pokemon in the active. But yeah, definitely against the Lost Zone, you want to go second with the deck, which is kind of interesting. Their testing group, the Mahomies, they've all been rocking this like since Worlds and possibly even before that. So they have just made slight tweaks with the Mew EX coming into the deck list, sticking with Flying P, sticking with Pokemon Go Zapdos. These are all cards they've been big fans of. And overall, it just seems like a very simple shell. Mew seems like a decent card just to top up throughout the game, and just gives you extra burst potential as well, that genome hacking in matchups where you can double Flaffy. Notably, this list isn't playing a Raihan at all, just sticking with the double Arven. But the Judge Path still seems to be a really strong combination of cards, and yeah, it's still Miraidon just doing Miraidon things, keeping decks honest with either hand disruption combos or with early aggressive knockouts plays. So it seems to be pretty good. I imagine Jesse is playing a very similar list to JW. We'll probably get confirmation of that throughout the week, but yeah, no surprise to see more Miraidons doing very well. They were all really high at the top after day one. I think the field may have got a little bit less favourable for them as the day went on, but impressive to see them still make this top 8 run. I think they actually faced each other in top 8, which is unfortunate. Possibly they could have gone further, but JW did end up falling to a Lost Zone matchup in the end. But it seemed like a very good metagame call from the players. I'm pretty sure they were hot on Miraidon anyway, but there's Colorless Lugia hype going into this tournament, and also somewhat Charizard hype. So if you're happy with Judge Path as a win condition, as well as like knowing you can take out a Pidgeot during the game and just hurt their draw engine, like the meta seemed to form slightly favorably for Miraidon. Now that may not happen going into Sacramento in the next few tournaments, because the Colorless Lugia hype has died down, probably, I would expect, at least. It didn't perform all that well. So I would expect there to be, again, a shift back to Single Strike or other builds of Lugia going ahead. We have our third variation of Lost Zone doing well, so it seems to be just doing well in all sorts of iterations. This is also a very single prize focus build from Terrence, and it's going to be the Radiant Charizard approach, which is pretty cool to see. It has the 151 Ditto as its only new inclusion. They said that they led it like 10 times throughout their tournament, so it was a really good inclusion. I still kind of just shake my head, but they are playing really high ball search counts already, so it's not like you can play any more ball search in the list, so it's not like there would be a card I would cut for the Ditto, so at least in this regard, it's kind of better than what I've been ragging on Ditto previously, where it's like people are playing one less of their actual good V Pokemon or one less actual Nest Ball. The Ditto just seems to be an addition on top of everything else they're already playing to maximize their counts. So at least that is something going well for them, which makes me cringe a little bit less about the deck list. And outside of this, it's a very streamlined Charizard build. It does have the Pokemon Go Articuno to push out the Cramorant, into 120, which is very helpful into Cresselia. We actually saw Pedro do this in the World Championships and possibly even the NAIC. They were playing the Articuno tech, so you had that extra push of damage output. Also playing the Hawlucha. Obviously, this list doesn't have Greninja available to it, so you're just trying to use a Flying Entry Sableye combo to give yourself a better time there. It's playing Double Clara and the Rod, so you have plenty of recycle of Manaphy, plus all your other Pokemon, even playing a third copy of Sableye, so it just has tons of access to Lost Mine throughout the entire game. It has those Beach Courts, which I think is a really solid card when you're not playing the Mirage Gates to help you just pivot throughout the game, and obviously unlocks your Charizard towards those latter stages, so overall looks really solid. For me, I still really like seeing a Magma Basin in the deck list. I think it helps out against the Lugia matchups, even the Single Strike matchup. But that would be the only thing that I sort of question about this list overall. And it seems like good techs as well, coming in with the Hawlucha for one matchup, Spiritomb for another, or a couple of matchups, I suppose. Articuno, again, giving even more respect to Gardevoir, even though it's like a fairly favourable matchup already for the deck list. Just putting a lot of respect into a ton of these matchups, which overall leads to a pretty solid result from Terrence. Brent Tonneson also making it all the way over to America and getting the results, playing an adaptation of the sort of Aussie approach. I know a lot of the Australian players have been pretty adamant on their way of playing the deck list, but we have seen that Brent has finally added at least some reversal energies into the deck list, so it's a slight sway away from the Zacian Forest Stone package that we saw previously, but is sticking to their guns with the high work accounts and just overall high support accounts, rather than playing Fish and Palpad, and just having more proactive, good early game cards where you see the full 4 copies of the Fog Crystal, so you're never missing a beat with the concealed cards, you're never missing a beat with just turn attachments throughout the game, and you're always having fodder with your refinements. Is playing the Mew EX from 151, so again, backing that choice to give yourself more flexibility in what you can attack with, which I think is very powerful, and I think most notably really helps out against the Tina matchup, which was kind of nowhere to be seen, actually. Interesting to see how that dropped off in popularity for this tournament. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on. Also, small adaptation. It's playing 4 70 hit point rolls, no 60 hit pointers, so you get caught short a little bit less with Echoing Horn plays or this, that, and the other from opponents, which is somewhat worthwhile. I do think there are murmurings of Alolan Vulpix being around, so I think you still have to play safe than sorry and have the 60 hit pointer and just know when to prioritize evolving that one, and how you try and evolve up that one is quite important. But I understand the mentality of just not wanting to get mugged off, especially if you're having to use Mysterious Tail Mew to get set up in the game, then you have to get a 60 hit point rolls down, then it can feel really ugly if the opponent high rolls the 10. But overall, it seems like a very solid, I'm at least drawing well in the early stages build from Brent, and that's always been the sort of Aussie mentality with this build, and it still seems to be serving them very, very well. Really interesting to see some of the Australian players coming over to a number of these regionals now that they have so few of their own on their own circuits. And finally, then in the top 8, we do have a Turbo Chen Pao. This is the Canadian build, and there's been a lot of talk around this deck list over the last couple of weeks, and Grant once again proving that this seems to be the superior 60 that you can be piloting right now. Just the very high density of item cards and really backing into the Industrious Incisors, so you cycle through your deck so aggressively. You thin so well with Shivery Chill plus Concealed Cards combo. You just have a lot of draw in the opening stages, and you have those Cancelling Cologne power spikes. You have those cross-switcher plays to turn off Manaphy, as well as, gust up multi-prize threats for your big Chen Pao turns, that sort of thing. And yeah, another impressive result. It feels like the mentality has shifted towards Chen Pao, where it's becoming more accepted thanks to this new 60. And it felt like a lot of high-profile players were actually piloting Chen Pao this weekend to various success. It didn't look all that incredible to me when I was watching the games itself from Grants, and it always looks a little bit sus. There are games you just pack up early with this deck, but it lets you play best of threes and is in the game in a lot of situations because of how it can navigate a really interesting prize map when it retains that one prize board state and has ways to literally leapfrog with a Greninja as well. So super interesting deck. Also seemed fairly well placed in that it was happy to go against the new wave of Charizard, was happy to go into Gardevoir certainly as well. So from a metagame perspective, I do think Chien-Pao is right on up there as another great pick right now. And the list is just consistent enough to carry you through to good success. We're also going to have a look at the day 1 and day 2 deck usage. We have the top 6 in popularity for the day 1 field, and I was really surprised by this. I would definitely have put either Giratina or Lost Zone in my top 3, but it was the 4th most played deck at only 10%. And it was actually the Charizard that really showed up at 15%. I'd be expecting throughout these few regionals, actually, nothing should really go above that sort of 15 to 18% threshold. I think we are going to see across the board little shifts here and there of things moving up and down 3 or 4%, really. We see 13% Lugia Archeops, that is combining Colorless and Single Strike. I would expect it to overall be going down a little bit because Colorless overall really flopped and stunk the place out in Peoria. But I do think there's genuine reason to still like Single Strike because I think it's pretty good into Miraidon, still solid into the Lost Zone players, the Gardevoir players, that sort of thing. The only caveat is, and the fear for Single Strike builds of Lugia, is that it has that weaker Charizard matchup and it is slightly more exploitable for Charizard players. So if we're expecting Charizard to still remain that high percentage, which also didn't make top 8, let's not forget, both of the 2 most popular decks in the room didn't convert as well as you would hope. Miraidon also very popular, more popular than I would have expected. And like, where is Giratina? Like, I really don't understand. Giratina somewhat worried about colorless Lugia because the army of Snorlax they have to get through, which is a concern for the deck. But other than that, it's like a still super well-rounded archetype and farms Charizard, which was really popular in the day 1 field. So I actually feel low-key like this could have been a really good tournament for a Giratina player, but it just didn't seem to be that popular in the room overall. Let's have a look at the day 2 usage now. And Charizard did really well. Converted from 15%, the most popular deck in the room day 1, to then being even more dominant as the most popular deck in the room day 2. So that's even with other Charizards knocking each other out of contention for day 2 as well. So shows that against other archetypes in the field, the Arvanzard, which was probably the most popular Charizard overall, converted very well. It seems to just have what it needs to be a problem in the game right now. Gardevoir shot up to the 2nd sort of best choice, I guess, for day 1 conversion. And then we have the Lost Zone box also doing pretty well. Miraidon did pretty okay despite its popularity. Chien-Pao also doing pretty well. But Lugia with that massive drop-off, only 16 of them in the day 2 overall after being such a huge number of players piloting it in that first day. Overall, I think this day 2 is kind of a better representation of what I'd expect for Sacramento. Possibly less Charizard. I think 20% is a really sort of high number to expect for day 1 field. But I would also expect with Colorless Lugia possibly shifting back towards, or at least that question being asked of Lugia, where it had a pretty poor showing overall. Should there still be some Giratina in the format? It's not just that Colorless Lugia was putting this deck at bay. There was also the headache of maybe Mew EX going into some sort of deck lists. But if Charizard's going to continue to be one of the most popular decks in the room, it makes Giratina look really good to me. And I think Giratina is also like very solid into the Miraidon decks, into the Lost Zone boxes, and into the Gardevoirs as well. It still seems to be that sort of well-rounded deck. Also worth noting that obviously Mew has sort of fallen off that cliff, and it seems like rightly so. Even with Rowan doing very well with a very specific deck list, there is still that genuine fear of Charizard, and I don't know how likely it is that a Fang Snipe immediately wins you the game. You still have to get them on certain hands where they don't have multiple trainers in hand that can get them weaving towards a way out of path and a way into candying. Even if they don't have a way out of path, if they just attach Candy to Zard, that can still be just backbreaking for Mew players because they can just slow attach to a lizard and it's not going anywhere. So yeah, that's still intriguing to me. Yet to be seen. I need to test more of the Mew thing to see if it's real or if it's still just cross your fingers and hope to hit other matchups in the day, which is fair enough at the end of the day. But and a few other things that I thought were notable, not really seeing much Rapid Strike box, which is still kind of interesting. I don't know how bad its Charizard matchup is. I feel like it does get worse with less 60 hit points Charmanders around for them to feast if they go first. And it is still a high maintenance deck in the game, so it feels like it just wasn't backed by many people for this tournament, which is interesting to me, which I think is a deck that you shouldn't really sleep on either. Let me know your thoughts down below, though. What are you planning for Sacramento? Am I right in thinking that Colorless Lugia was the big loser of this tournament, or did it still do pretty okay without getting a top 8 placement? I'll hear your thoughts down below. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you tomorrow for another video. Cheers.